Life cycle service. In the medieval period and the epoch of feudalism, a non-religious relation came into being that has left a strong legacy. This was life cycle service. Almost everyone from peasant to lord were expected to spend the first 7 to 15 years of their working life in service of another household. For example, in a farmhouse, or as a craftsman in a guild, or a page for a knight, or as a lady in waiting. Because of this, there was a great focus on the transition into adulthood, tied into work in the Middle Ages. Children of nobles would await their inheritance and subsequently become lords and ladies, and the normal folk would be paid modest sums and save what they could so that one day they would be able to set up households, guilds, farms, and shops of their own. So, though wage labour existed in the Middle Ages, it tended to occur only in the first part of life. During this time, people were not only expected to save money and acquire skills, but also to learn manners and etiquette, which referred to a wide range of things, not only how one behaved, but one's sensibilities and tastes and interests. Also self-mastery, how to control the self vis-a-vis base desires. In effect, etiquette referred to education more generally, and the implication was that disciplined work under direction had the purpose of transforming the young into fully formed, self-disciplined adults. Because of this arrangement, researchers found that attitudes towards work have differed outside Northern Europe, most notably in the classical world. Greek and Roman sources document aristocrats who felt that work was only fit for slaves. Indeed, Aristotle insisted that work was in fact harmful because it took up too much of one's time that would be better suited to fulfilling political and social obligations. This contrasts with the medieval picture of Northern Europe, where work had a transformative essence and everyone is expected to do it at some point. Thus, what came to be referred to as the Protestant work ethic in fact existed long before Protestantism. Impact of capitalism. The advent of capitalism beckoned a significant change in attitudes towards work. Here, Graeber defines capitalism as the transformation of relations of service into relations of wage labour, whereby those without capital were obliged to work for those with capital. Instead of a transformative, edifying experience, work became a means of social reform and a virtue in its own right. How did this happen? Over time, life cycle relations began to break down. Masses of people became displaced and the proletariat for the first time came into being. Many people were stuck in periods of waiting and inevitably abandoned their masters because, with the deterioration of guild structures, it was impossible to become a master oneself. As a result, more and more people began marrying early, attending festivals and drinking and gambling. The Calvinists, or Puritans, broke away from the Roman Catholic Church in the 16th century. Puritans were in despair and moral panic. In reactionary spirit, it was their duty to defend civility and bolster Christian ideals. They argued that this new class of people should be placed under the strict command of a workmaster. The Puritans asserted that work was punishment but also redemption. Initially coined by sociologist Max Weber, the term Protestant work ethic applies to the Calvinists and their crusade for hard work. Weber contended that Calvinism had a significant impact in the emergence of capitalist systems. Calvinism promoted an undertaking of secular vocations with as much zeal as possible. Moreover, the new religions such as Calvinism forbade squandering money on superfluities, donating to churches was limited due to rejection of icons, and even giving to charity was frowned upon because it was seen to promote laziness. Laziness not only burdened fellow man, but was an insult to God, for work was meant to glorify him. The way Puritans solved this dilemma, what to do with money gained from work, was to encourage investment for future industriousness. This provided a significant boost to nascent capitalism in Western societies. The Methodists followed suit after the Industrial Revolution, but the tradition was also taken up by less religious members of the middle class. The centrality of work became one of the primary characteristics of Victorian society. Prominent Victorian essayist Thomas Carlyle in 1843 claimed the new gospel of England to be work. To Carlyle, work was the essence of life itself, and more importantly than material gain, work enabled moral transformation. One could forget their uncertainties, anxieties, and skepticism, and remake and realize themselves in the act of work. Widespread in the era of industrialization was the labor theory of value. Initially, economists such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo advanced the labor theory of value, along with contemporary industrialists. This was also taken up with vigor by socialists and labor organizers, and later, the labor theory of value was elevated with technical terminology in Marx's Das Kapital. But prior to this, it was already a widely accepted theory and embraced by the working classes, especially in America. Even Abraham Lincoln declared that labor was prior to capital and should be held in higher regard. This was subversive, of course, and provided a framework for economic transformation. The ruling classes eventually reversed public belief in the labor theory of value worldwide, and it was in America that the attack was most calculated and effective. In USA, the emergence of corporate capitalism, or robber barons as the new class was initially characterized, was met with considerable hostility. In order to ameliorate public opinion and also pave the way for political reform, corporate luminaries like steel magnate Andrew Carnegie launched an intellectual campaign claiming that conglomerates would be able to solve the problems of industrial society. They made the case for consumerism. It was in fact capital and not labor that created prosperity in modern societies. The concentration of capital in the hands of an industrious few would lead to lower prices of commodities for the working man, meaning everyone could have affordable access to material goods. This intellectual campaign of the late 19th century was hugely successful. In contemporary society, very few people have heard of the labor theory of value, though it was practically axiomatic before the robber barons. Conversely, the notion of consumerism and low prices for all is a widely accepted feature of modern life. To Graeber, this paradigm shift was made possible by a critical flaw in the labor theory of value itself, this being the over-focus on production. Most work cannot be said to actually produce anything. Work tends to involve maintenance, organization, and preparation, not creation in any real sense. Thus, all other types of labor he characterizes as caring labor are removed from the picture. This also includes labor performed outside of the workplace, for example, giving birth, then nurturing and educating children into adulthood when they are able to enter the workforce. Indeed, there has never been a moment in history when most workers were employed in factories. To obscure caring labor obscures the fact that we all collectively form the world we inhabit, so we could just as well create a different world, one better tailored for the majority. Today, in Bullshit Jobs, David Graeber argues that, in the modern world, a lot of work is increasingly becoming unnecessary, doing nothing for society or even businesses, which have grown so much and expanded their workforces. The gospel of wealth vision, emerging with the tycoons of the 19th century, declared that wealth is created from visionary entrepreneurs at the top, the monopolizers of capital. An implication of this is that people are reduced to machines and their work loses wider meaning. In the tradition of the gospel of wealth, we identify increasingly not with the things we produce, but the things we consume, and more so now with the lifestyles we identify with and buy into. For example, a gym membership in view of a healthy lifestyle, locally sourced foods to be environmentally aware, plane tickets to be broad-minded. However, despite our personal choices and identities, we cannot help but seek meaning in our jobs. In this regard, there is a paradox of work. According to a multitude of studies and surveys, it has been concluded that 1. Most people's sense of dignity and self-worth is tied in with their jobs. 2. Most people hate their jobs. In the large discipline of the sociology of work, a great deal of effort has been mustered to try and reconcile this paradox. Al Gini and Terry Sullivan said that to be denied work is to be denied the ability to define and respect oneself, and concluded that work has become increasingly an end in of itself and less a means to an end, i.e., less about obtaining the resources in order to pursue other non-economic values, family, cultural, religious, political, for example. This can only be reconciled with the very fact that workers do hate their jobs. It is the act of self-sacrifice and abnegation that is somehow seen as character forming, and the hatred of one's job can provide feelings of self-worth and dignity, especially when boasting about being overworked. Even in the absence of this type of self-worth, many people have feelings of vitriol and superiority towards those who avoid work. So meaning can be found in the negation of the implications of not working. As mentioned before, mainstream media consistently supports stereotypes of work-shy poor people without the will or competence to maintain a job. Society suffers from a constant barrage of people who want something for nothing, and the rest of us have to work harder in order to make up for it. So the unemployed are contemptible parasites. Meanwhile, individuals who work hard in ghastly jobs under a superior who perhaps treats them harshly are noble and dignified and owed respect from fellow citizens for shouldering the burden. An attempt to summarize Graeber's conclusion. Despite the lack of discernible meaning, we tend to value work. Work is valuable as a form of discipline and a noble self-sacrifice. The fusion of the biblical fall of Adam, forced to live by his own means, with the medieval attitude that work is the essence of self-realization, results in the view that paid labor is the only way to become a genuine adult. We must commit self-abnegation and flagellation should we be worthy of our consumerist toys. To Graeber, the answer to the question, why is there no protest to the rise of unnecessary employment, and why don't we as a society attempt to reduce our hours spent working, is a complex combination of Judeo-Christian theology, bygone medieval practices, and successful bourgeois intellectual campaigns. But it can be ultimately brought down to self-sacrifice. Graeber writes, suffering has become a badge of economic citizenship. Without it, you have no right to make any other claim.